Welcome, everybody, and thank you especially to coming to Tenable sponsor stage today. First of all, I'm happy to see my friends, right, from the S4's gone past, right? This is a great reunion that we're having today. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a concept that I've been pushing now for, I'm going to say, a couple years. And this is the concept that we basically look at these ICS, OT operational systems. We look at them differently than we look at the pipes and the metal and the pumps of a plant. And so when I was and my primary industry was pulp and paper. When I was in pulp and paper, a number of years ago, we should say a number of decades ago probably, I remember buying an industrial control system sort of screen, one pane of glass, right? VAX VMS based, $250,000 to expand to get one more operator position. That's what it cost. So all that was capitalized, right? So you had to go through all kinds of budget meandering and capitalization and finance. And I remember when we took the first Windows NT operator station, it's like, it was $2,500. I thought, this is fantastic. So we bought a bunch of them. I stuck them in the control room. And then 2 or 3 years later, we came back and the vendor said, oh, by the way, this PC, was probably a 386 or something with a coprocessor in it. You need to replace that because the new software needs a bigger, stronger, faster computer. And so, okay, I went back to the engineering manager or the plant manager and I said, I need like $75,000 to upgrade the PCs in this control room to run the new software. And the accounting people looked at me and they said, you have 27 years of depreciation left on that asset. And I really, young engineer, right? I was like, I don't understand. They said, well, we bought it the same way we had bought every control system component before. And so it was completely capitalized, had not been depreciated off the books. And it's like, I came to this realization, it's like, we got to do this different. This stuff is going to turn over, right? So now we treat the control system pieces more like our IT pieces, right? Where you get a new laptop every 3 years or 5 years or whatever the period of time is. I believe that there's some components of that we need to do within the industrial control system security arena too. And we need to treat these systems more like we kind of put them on a pedestal, or we treat them differently, right? They're just another piece of plant equipment. They should be programmed into the same sort of financial decisions, risk decisions, and I believe maintenance decisions, right? The other thing that I've never understood in this industry is that these systems are the crown jewels and bread and butter of your entire enterprise, right? When the control system stops, either really bad things happen, which we hopefully don't see, or your production goes down. But we spend a lot of money on mitigating risk on the IT side of the house, and we kind of ignore this, or we shuffle it under the carpet, the risk that we have introduced into our manufacturing environments with the computerization of the control system, right? So I've never been able to satisfy my curiosity for why we haven't recognized that and invested financially at a level to take that risk down to an acceptable level, right? Now, let's change over to the maintenance subject. And I am not a maintenance engineer, so if you are, please bear with my oversimplification of maintenance practices, right? But maintenance practices have changed significantly over the years. If you look back at how we originally maintained equipment within a plant, when it broke, we fixed it. That's called corrective maintenance, right? You run it to failure, it breaks, and you fix it. most people will say that's a fairly spendy way of doing maintenance, right? The next one is preventative or schedule-driven. That's like, okay, I'm going to take my car in every 5,000 kilometers or 3,000 miles or whatever the interval is, and I'm going to change the oil no matter what. I do it on a schedule, and I do it religiously, and it's shown to prevent downtime or failures. Then you get into proactive and predictive maintenance, which is where you're actually doing some analysis around the environment so that you can do the right amount of maintenance to the equipment, right? That's where the sweet spot is from a economics perspective, right? Things like lube oil analysis, right? Where you're actually analyzing the lubricant in the machine and you predict, oh, it's going to fail soon. Well, we should do something about it before that soon happens, and then that prevents any outages or issues like that, right? So I maintain that the whole run to failure thing, there's a lot of risk there, right? And it's expensive. So you don't plan it, right? You're basically tossing the dice or rolling the dice, and just when the machine decides to fail, it's going to fail, and you have to respond. Probably more importantly, in my personal opinion, this is hard on people. This is IR, this is firefighting, this is all hands on deck, something's broken, the whole plant is down, we're losing X times $10,000 a minute or whatever your sort of revenue run rate is on that machine. It is very stressful and is very costly, right? And so I believe we need to pivot away from that. But this is, quite frankly, this is what we do in cyber right now, for the most part. We're focusing on response. We're focusing on, what a good friend of many of ours, Mike Asante, would have called, where you sort of the right of boom, left of boom, right? We're focusing on what happens after the breach, right? Post-breach. Run to failure is also not necessarily good at handling some of the common mode failures. Like if you have an electrical surge in your plant and it comes in and it wipes out all of these, transformers or electrical devices, like it's really hard to replace them all at the same time, right? So there's some common mode failure issues here too. So my premise, right? This is what I was talking about a little earlier, right? We tend to treat cyber like the run to failure part, right? We wait until ransomware comes into the system to respond to it. The legacy equipment issues that we still face, right? I am guilty. I had a boss in that same unnamed pulp mill who I think one of the reasons he hired me is because I had come from a plant that used the same old, and this was HP 1000, HP 7906 hard drives that were 10 meg and as big as a washing machine. That's what we ran our DCS on. He bought all the equipment from the plant that I came from and had it in a warehouse, and I think he hired me because I was one of the few that knew how to keep that stuff running. The vendor had obsoleted it, 15 years earlier. So there's this entire gray market that still exists on eBay, or there's companies that have stood up that they go around and they purchase the equipment from plants that are being decommissioned, and they have some guy in there with a toothbrush, guy or gal, cleaning the boards and putting them in the ultrasonic thing and spinning them up and cleaning them and testing them, and okay, really? You will lose $100,000 a minute if your production line is down, but you're going to go buy parts on eBay. We're not having the right conversation with the business people here, right? I think if the chief risk officer of the company knew that you were doing that, they would figure out a way to help get the updates or upgrades or whatnot done, right? So I believe that if you look at like the NIST cybersecurity framework and you look at the steps that you should go through, I disagree with some of the others in the industry that all of your focus should be on detection and response. And I know cybersecurity hygiene is a bad word or phrase. I actually believe that you can do an awful lot in the prevention category, right? We can do better. We need to do better as a community about getting the systematic processes in place to be able to harden these systems so we do more to prevent boom, right? Left of boom kind of stuff. Okay, so that was kind of the run to failure piece. So if I kind of make this analogy move forward, I talked about scheduled maintenance, preventative maintenance, right? Something you do on your car every 5,000 kilometers or 3,000 miles. To me, that's no different than hiring a consultant to come in every 3 years and walk around with a clipboard, and they're going to go and open a bunch of cabinets, and they're going to go, oh yeah, you got this many PLCs from this company and this many from this company, and they're going to look at a few logs and go around. They're going to give you a big fat report that costs 25 grand or something that will gather dust on the shelf until the end of time, but makes your auditor happy, right? So you have complied with the intention of whatever, NERC-CIP or whatever regulatory regime that you live under, but the day, even before it's complete, it's obsolete, right? It doesn't really do you any good from a maintenance perspective. It helps you satisfy the tick box. I believe that in today's sort of threat environment, that anybody that, I don't believe that that meets the due diligence kind of sniff test for what you should be doing on a day-to-day basis to understand what your environment looks like, how to defend it, and it served a purpose, right? It got us to where we are now, but it doesn't, it's like old cheese or something. It doesn't really age that well. I like old cheese, by the way, but like not the stuff in the fridge that has different colors than what it was supposed to look like, right? So now let's talk about doing things on a proactive basis. We had this cool technology when I was in industry, and these cameras cost like 30 grand or something like that, and you had to have a special training, and you had to have a special person that came with you to make sure you didn't break the $30,000 camera. But you took this infrared camera around, and we took pictures of electrical switchgear. We would open switchgear, we would take pictures of it, we would look at what buses were hot, if there was any bolts that were loose perhaps that were causing some issues thermally. This picture is of a motor and a pump. And you can see that the motor, there's some red and some white. That indicates that there's a lot of heat in that particular area of that motor. The place I stole the picture from indicated that that was because the fan had broken on the motor. So there was no cooling happening on that motor. The motor pump train has not failed yet. It's still running. The plant is still running. But by using a tool like thermal imaging, you can go look at the pump and the motor, and you can go, oh, this thing it's kind of on its last legs. So you can order a new one. You can have it sitting there as a standby or a spare, and you can program it into your next maintenance schedule. And you go, okay, well, we're going to have 2 weeks, we're going to do a turnaround, and we're going to replace that, right? No downtime, less cost. You're not expedited shipping stuff. I worked for a company that sold control valves, and some of the craziest, I remember chartering entire planes to put parts on to get them to a plant. And, not being able to breathe when they told me how many dollars I was spending. We spent 10 times as much on shipping the device as the device actually cost. And these were still like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of actual parts. But when it's $100,000 a minute for whatever plant you're at, and that's the cost of a private jet to fly that to some remote place in British Columbia was not a big issue. It was not a big deal, right? It was like, thank you, you did the right thing. But This is better. Okay, so wouldn't it be cool if we can do that on our OT assets? Well, so this is the Tenable sponsor stage, so I get to talk about product, right? We can do that. If you went back a decade or so ago, I would have stood on this same stage and I would have said, you know what? We have a technology problem. We do not have customized technology to safely and reliably inspect and communicate in these OT environments, right? I maintain now we have a people problem. We have technology that can fix this, and it's not just Tenable. There's other vendors around that we have specialized, purpose-built, safe and reliable methods to look inside of your industrial control system and to help you predict or detect when things don't look right. I mean, look at the network traffic. You can baseline that and tell when things are starting to go awry, right? Before it actually breaks. You can get indicators that there may be an attacker or an intruder in the system that you can contain before the damage gets too big, right? So I kind of think of all this as a proactive, preventative type of maintenance scheme. So we can do that at Tenable through passive network traffic analysis, right? So we stick a sensor on your network, or we do a span or RSpan to consume all of the network traffic, and we run that through our passive detection engines. Those engines are what came from Indige when we purchased the Indige company and rolled that into Tenable OT, or it comes from what used to be called PVS, Passive Vulnerability Scanner, or NNM, which is Nessus Network Monitor. Those are the two engines that we use to passively analyze the traffic based on if the traffic is IT sort of oriented or OT or IoT oriented. That wasn't really enough. In a lot of these cases, these devices are very quiet, right? They only talk when they're speak when you're spoken to. And so one of the things, the main driver for why Tenable purchased Indige was the active query capabilities. So we actually have the capability to communicate using the vendor's own protocols with the PLC or with the RTU. So Siemens PLC, we ask it, hello, we see your Siemens PLC, what's your firmware, what's your programming like, and we have a very safe and reliable communication with it, exactly the same as how Siemens does it, right? So that gives us very granular, detailed information. The other kind of, I think, for me anyway, thing that makes Tenable stand out is that most, over 50%, maybe, of the assets that exist in your OT environment, they're actually IT assets, right? They're switches and routers and Windows PCs and servers and stuff like that. So what we do is we take the specialized OT technology, we build a list of all of those sensitive controller devices, and we say, if you're not in the list of sensitive controller devices, you as a customer can now scan those other IT assets using Nessus, right? So we have a version of Nessus that's included in the Tenable OT product line so that you can basically manage both your IT and your OT assets that happen to live on the OT side of the firewall. Okay, so that's the product pitch part. Now, that was more about asset identification, device classification, right? Where we're talking about how do you build this asset inventory. The next part of sort of the maintenance, and this ties into kind of like the lube oil conversation, right? In a machine, you would take a sample of the oil, you would run it through a testing laboratory, or you have some testing capabilities yourself, and based on what you saw, you would sort of predict or program in your next maintenance schedule. Well, we can do that with detection, right? So if we have passive access to the data that's transiting these OT networks, we can run it through a number of detection engines to be able to tell you if there's anything wrong with what's going on inside of these networks. Tenable, we do that in 3 different ways. We run it through a policy engine. So very powerful engine that you, as the customer, get to write the rules for. We have a whole set of sample rules for most of the things that have been requested over the years. But things like, if you see this default password transiting on the network, trip this policy because we thought we had gotten rid of that clear text default password, right? So anything that you can kind of describe in that policy language, we can look at as it's flying down the wire. Very, very powerful. The second one is an anomaly-based engine. The anomaly-based engine is essentially baselining all the traffic, and then you can enable alerts if you deviate from that. So an example of that would be, I only run GE PLCs in this particular plant. Why is some device trying to talk to me in Rockwell SIP protocol? That could be malware, right? We've seen malware kits and frameworks that will go out and they'll kind of walk through all the different protocols until they find something that answers. So you should not have a vendor's protocol on your network that you don't have that vendor's equipment on your network, right? So we can alert on that. The third one is a signature-based detection engine, right? So we're consuming and we're writing our own malware signatures to detect the known malware that transits your network, right? So that's kind of a no-brainer. That's the NIDS kind of approach. Now, when we built the active query capability to communicate with the controllers using their own native language, an interesting side effect or an interesting capability came to bear at the same time. We found that we could ask the controller for its logic. We can ask it for its config, right? So if we have a Rockwell PLC, ControlLogix PLC, we can say, oh, hello, Mr. Rockwell PLC, can you please send us your configuration? And it will give us all of its ladder logic and configuration settings. We can store that as a snapshot, and then you can use that to see any configuration changes that have been made. Now, I know, and I'm not purporting to be like an asset management system, right? You can buy those capabilities from the individual vendors. We have manufacturers that have 20 different kinds of PLCs in their environment, and there are very few solutions that let you kind of track changes in one place on all of those different devices. So we have some of our customers that this is one of the most important features. They almost could care less about the security parts of our security product. They're using it to track kind of rogue changes. It's like, well, why is my product off spec? And it's like, oh, well, somebody at 2 a.m. changed this parameter from this to this, and now the robot is moving different. And so this product is kind of quality skewed because of that. And so this is a pretty powerful capability that is, I think, one of the capabilities that appeals to the OT engineering side of the house, right? So we always talk about this challenge between the information technology people, the IT people, and the OT people. Well, we've found that it's very useful to have features and capabilities that appeal to each of those different audiences. So, yep, lots of security stuff, but guess what? There's also some hardcore maintenance kind of productivity features here as well. So, in summary, if you go back to the premise of my talk, I believe that we treat our highly critical, so I still believe that the control system is one of the most critical assets you have in the plant, right? And I think I know this because I used to wear pagers and radios and two-way radios and cell phones and all this stuff, and at 2 a.m. when something broke because the control system broke, it was Marty's body that started to buzz and vibrate and ding, and there was literally a two-way radio on my desk, my bedstand, right? So if they're that important, why do we just wait till they break? And that can be physically breaking if you're using legacy equipment and a card fails or you have some sort of hardware failure in your system. I mean, we used to fight like, oh, your C drive is full, right? We filled the hard disk up with a log, and so the control system stopped working. Why do we wait for that failure to happen? Why do we wait for breach to happen? Why do we wait for ransomware to get in the system before we actually start to apply defensive techniques? I mean, you know that ransomware operators, for the most part, they're not going burning 0 days on ransomware, right? They're using vulnerabilities that are published, known, and have been around for like years. Well, if you know that, why aren't you doing some basic vulnerability management practices to avoid the ransomware trap, right? So if you get into a more proactive monitoring regime in these systems, I maintain that we can run it like a piece of physical equipment. We have an economic sweet spot. You can overinvest, right? That's the right-hand side of the curve. But there is a sweet spot in the middle that you can use that will save you money. So that's my pitch. Thank you for coming, and I'm happy to take a few questions. Or a lot of questions. Yes, and they're going to have a mic runner because this is being recorded. So we have a question up here.
Yeah, you did mention about the anesthesia.
There's a mic that's on its way. Just hold your hand up so he knows where you're coming from. There you go.
Hi.
Thanks, man.
You did mention about the anomaly detection that you had, and you said that you needed to have a baseline established to detect anomaly.
Yep.
Is that baseline, is that something that a plant manager would set, or is that something like a machine learning driven baseline that kind of learns on its own?
It's going to be something that's learned by the product, right? So the product is going to sit there and gather that data, and then you can set the parameters of how you're going to flag for that. So, a great question.
Okay.
Dr. Conklin.
We talked about this briefly yesterday. I think it was yesterday. It was in the Sun.
It was in the Sun.
And that is, if I have a plant and I've got 16 pumps and 42 valves and all that, and these things require greasing and turning on and off and various maintenance activities, I know how many people it takes to do that maintenance. And I can set up a work schedule that says, on Thursday, you're going to go do this, on Tuesday,
Yep.
do that. Why can't we do the same with all our cyber assets and go to the next level and say, for me to maintain this control system, it requires this much time for this much time for this person for this person for that. Put it all in the spreadsheet because Excel's the second best tool for anything you want to do. And ship it off to the boss and say, that's what I need next year.
Yeah, it's a great conversation that we had. You know, I think when you have better data that can come out of your environment and your systems, you do have better justification or actual work schedules, right? I mean, we were talking about sort of the Navy context where every single thing you do has an SOP that tells you you need these parts, you need these people with this training, and it's going to take you this many minutes to do, each kind of task. There's no reason we can't get there in kind of the cybersecurity space, right? Where we have defined the roles, the responsibilities, the specific job training requirements, et cetera. So I believe we can get there. And I think that having better insight and visibility into these networks gives us a better, I don't want to use the word argument, it gives us a better case to go to management and leadership and say, you've asked me to do this, I need this many people to do this job. And if you remember when I opened the conversation, I said, I used to argue that it was a technology problem, we don't have the tech. I think we have the tech. It's a people problem now. So that's a great question, Art. Any other questions? Thanks for coming. I want to let you know that the closing session on the Tenable stage today was going to be our CTO, Glenn Penley, who can't make it. And I acknowledge Andrew there. So I'll be replacing Glenn. So if you like to hear Marty talk, come back here at, I think it's 2. I think it's Andrew in the lights over there. Go ahead, Mr. Ginter.
I was going to ask you another question.
Yes.
I love the maintenance analogy. to me, an issue with the analogy is a lot of the maintenance statistics look backwards. When things fail, we break them, we replace them, we have numbers for how much this cost us. And so when we go to the business decision makers and say, I want a different maintenance system, I want you to spend $2 million on a predictive maintenance system, they ask, where's the ROI? And we can give them the ROI based on historical failures. The problem is that in the cyberspace, we don't often have, the average site doesn't have 27 historical failures with well understood costs. When we get the question, what's the ROI for this security? We're looking forward, not backward. How do we answer that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think we're in a lot better place than we were, like, say, even 2 years ago. I think the proliferation of ransomware, I think extremely well publicized and analyzed events like the Colonial Pipeline or Maersk Shipping or JBS Meats or any one of a number of these big ransomware events are giving us enough data to be able to say, hey, I know this wasn't our plant, but if it was, can we calculate what the cost would have been for us to respond, be offline for a week, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think you can build a much stronger argument. I also maintain that, especially with some of the configuration control aspects where we're helping you track what's happening inside the controllers and any changes, that helps with being able to prevent downtime, right? So this is some of the downtime avoidance conversation. And it's not just a cyber-based, it's not just a security-based conversation anymore. It's a conversation about the overall health of this asset, right? So I think we have much better data. Yes, every company probably doesn't have it, but if you've been dealing in cyber insurance at all, guess what? They're asking you the same questions. So if you get the right people, the risk officer from the company, the chief financial officer for the company, they probably have a pretty good understanding of how much it's going to cost if this asset goes away, and we can use that to help the justification process. But great question. Cool. I think we're out of time. But thanks for coming.